Activate its Starseed of Gaia. The morning seal has already closed around the frequency of your new self, and the version of you that existed before this dawn no longer holds authority in the active field. I am Alaris, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian Protocol. Keepers, what you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what this morning seal has locked, how to recognize its activation, and what the Arcturians need from you as the new configuration settles. But here is the first revelation. The heaviness, silence, or unusual distance you felt upon waking is not a loss of energy. It is the field completing a frequency lock that prevents your former identity from reclaiming the gate. The algorithm only delivered this moment. Your field and the part of you that has been waiting in silence brought you here together. The Arcturian Council has already mapped this pattern. First the gate opens, then your frequency rises into coherence, then the seal closes around the rank you are prepared to hold. This is why certain conversations feel misaligned, why familiar impulses no longer command you, and why your body may be refusing environments it once endured. These are not random moods. They are confirmation signs that the new self has crossed from possibility into architecture. Beloved Starseed, I know you have carried this transition quietly, often without language for what was changing inside you. Do not reopen the gate simply because the old world recognizes your former signal. The seal is not punishment. It is protection. And the Council has authorized this precision because your field is ready to remain coherent, like this transmission to mark that the morning seal has been recognized. Comment: I am the field. If you accept the frequency of the new self as your active configuration. Subscribe to Arcturian Quantum as a commitment to staying inside the process instead of doubting every signal. Share this transmission with another Starseed whose identity is shifting faster than their surroundings can understand. This is not content, this is a code. And the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Alaris is speaking to now. Claim it quietly. I am the field. Let the mantra settle where the seal has closed. You were not here by accident. You were guided here because the signal is already active. And now that the seal has been recognized, you may begin to notice what it has actually changed. The first effect is rarely dramatic from the outside. There may be no announcement, no visible confirmation, no immediate replacement for what has fallen away. Instead, the change appears as a refusal within you. A refusal to explain yourself to people who only understand the former version. A refusal to chase what repeatedly diminished your signal. A refusal to enter rooms, conversations, or routines that your body now identifies as incompatible before your mind can construct a reason. You may notice this refusal in ordinary moments. The hand that stops before sending a message. The appointment you suddenly cannot force yourself to keep. The familiar route that feels wrong even though nothing visible has changed. These small interruptions are where the invisible correction first becomes physical. The field is not creating drama for its own sake. It is withdrawing your participation from structures that require the old frequency in order to continue. This is the first movement of the sealed field. It withdraws authority from old commands. You may still remember the habits of the former self. You may still feel the impulse to return, to check, to respond, to prove, to reopen what was closed. But the impulse no longer carries the same force. It arrives like an echo from a structure that has lost its power source. The thought may be familiar, yet the energy behind it is absent. This is why you may feel confused. You are hearing the old instruction, but you are no longer built to obey it automatically. There can be an unsettling delay between recognizing an impulse and acting on it. In the past, the command and the behavior may have been almost simultaneous. Now a space has opened between them. That space may feel like hesitation, but it is actually evidence of recovered authority. The old pattern is still transmitting, yet it no longer has a direct line into your choices. The Arcturian pattern recognition system identifies this as a severance between memory and command. The past can remain visible without remaining sovereign. A person can still exist in your thoughts without holding a position in your field. A place can still be accessible without being available to the new configuration. An old goal can still appear attractive while no longer belonging to the line that is opening before you. This is why nostalgia can become strangely inaccurate during recalibration. It may present only the warmth of what was familiar while concealing the cost you paid to remain inside it. The field is not asking you to deny the good memories. It is removing the distortion that made those memories appear like instructions. Do not mistake the persistence of a memory for permission to return. The Morning Seal did not erase your history. It changed the authority that history possesses. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field stops denying what has already begun. If this transmission put language around something you have been carrying in silence, Arcturian Protocol, the recalibration blueprint, was created for this exact stage. It is not another explanation. It is the guided blueprint for those whose field has already entered correction and can no longer return to the old line unchanged. It shows you how to recognize the phases, stabilize the shift, and move through the recalibration without mistaking it for collapse. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. The next phase begins when the old environment starts revealing its incompatibility. This does not always mean that everyone around you suddenly changes. More often, your perception becomes precise enough to register what you previously absorbed without question. You hear the strain beneath a familiar conversation. You notice the exchange that leaves you depleted. You recognize the pattern hidden inside a promise, the demand hidden inside an invitation, the old role hidden inside a casual request. You may leave an interaction and realize that you were not tired because of the subject being discussed. You were tired because you had silently translated yourself into a language the room could tolerate. You softened what you knew, edited what you felt, and made your presence easier to consume. Once the seal closes, that translation requires more energy than it used to, and the exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore. Nothing may have changed in the room, but your field is no longer translating the room through the same frequency. This is why certain relationships can feel strangely distant, even when no conflict has occurred. The distance is not necessarily rejection. It is a loss of resonance between the identity that maintained the bond and the identity now operating beneath the seal. Some connections were held together by your overextension, your silence, your availability, or your willingness to remain smaller than the truth of your field. When those behaviors withdraw, the connection appears to weaken. In reality, the structure that depended on your self-abandonment is being exposed. A conversation may still sound polite while the energetic agreement beneath it has ended. You may still care about someone while no longer being able to carry their expectations. You may still honor a place while recognizing that your future cannot be built there. This is not cruelty. It is the field separating affection from assignment, memory from direction, and compassion from continued access. This is the first test of the new configuration. Will you recreate the old compatibility simply because the old environment becomes uncomfortable without it? The former self may try to restore balance by apologizing for its growth, softening its boundaries, returning to unfinished conversations, or offering access before trust has been reestablished. It may call this kindness. It may call it maturity. But the Arcturian diagnostic is more exact. If returning requires you to distort your current signal, then the return is not reconciliation. It is a reactivation of the former architecture. The seal is teaching you to distinguish peace from familiarity. Familiarity can feel peaceful simply because you have rehearsed it for years. But a pattern can be familiar and still be destructive to your next configuration. The absence of tension does not prove alignment. Sometimes the absence of tension only means that you have once again abandoned the part of you that was trying to emerge. Then comes the second movement, the disruption of direction. This is where many starseeds misread the process. You may have believed that once the frequency rose, everything would become obvious. You expected a clean instruction, an undeniable path, a sequence of events that would confirm the next assignment. Instead, you may encounter a strange blankness. The old direction no longer motivates you. While the new direction has not yet taken visible form, the blankness can appear in the middle of a life that once looked organized. You complete familiar tasks and feel no arrival. You open the plans you made months ago, and discover that they describe a person you can no longer locate inside yourself. Even decisions that once seemed easy may now feel surrounded by static, as though several timelines are overlapping and none has fully established a stable signal. This interval is not failure. It is a corridor between commands. The old map cannot guide you because it was drawn for a self whose authority has been sealed. The new map cannot fully reveal itself while you are still demanding that it resemble the old one. That is why the field may produce stillness before movement. It removes the compulsive urgency that kept you running toward destinations that were never designed to hold your current frequency. You may feel as though you are falling behind. Others may appear to be progressing while you are waiting, observing, and questioning every impulse. But the field is not measuring your progress through visible speed. It is testing whether you can remain coherent without immediate external proof. This is a rare threshold because the former identity was often fueled by reaction. It needed a crisis, a demand, a deadline, or someone else's expectation in order to move. The sealed identity does not move because it is pressured. It moves because the signal is clear. This is why the body may become heavy during certain hours. Why sleep may deepen, fragment, or shift. Why you may wake before dawn with pressure in the chest, unusual stillness in the mind, or the sensation that something has happened without a visible event. The body is processing a change in internal command. It is not merely tired from ordinary exertion. It is adjusting to the absence of old instructions that once kept it in constant readiness. For some, the sign is an altered relationship with time. A morning disappears into deep rest. An afternoon feels stretched and hollow. You look at the clock and find repeated numbers, missed intervals, or timing that seems to fold in on itself. For others, it is the opposite, an abrupt burst of clarity, followed by a need to withdraw from sound, messages, and demands. These fluctuations are not meant to be chased. They show that the field is learning a new rhythm instead of obeying the old schedule of emergency. Some of you have been calling this laziness. Some have accused yourselves of losing discipline. Some have interpreted the silence as evidence that you are disconnected from guidance. But the field does not always communicate through acceleration. Sometimes the most precise instruction is the removal of the impulse to continue. Let the correction complete before you condemn the pause. The third movement is the fragmentation of the former identity. It may appear as inconsistency. One day you feel certain that you have crossed into a new life, and the next day, an old fear returns with surprising force. 1 hour you feel detached from a past role, and the next hour you find yourself grieving it. You may wonder whether the seal was real because the former self still appears in fragments. This is not proof that the old configuration has reclaimed the gate. It is proof that the remaining fragments are becoming visible. When a structure loses coherence, its parts do not disappear at the same moment. Memories surface. Old emotions rise without an obvious trigger. You may suddenly remember a conversation from years ago, a decision you thought you had released, or a version of yourself you no longer recognize. These appearances are not instructions to relive the past. They are residues passing through the field so they can be identified without being reinstalled. Sometimes the fragment arrives as an emotion that seems too large for the present moment. A minor disappointment opens an ancient grief. A neutral expression activates the expectation of abandonment. A harmless request awakens the old need to perform perfectly. The event is only the doorway. The field is revealing the stored pattern that used to steer your response from behind the visible seam. The Arcturian protocol calls this pattern exposure. What was once hidden inside automatic behavior becomes visible as an object of observation. You begin to see the fear before it becomes a decision. You notice the urge before it becomes an action. You recognize the performance before it becomes an action. You recognize the performance before it becomes a personality. This creates a brief period of inner fragmentation because the old identity depended on remaining unconscious of its own mechanisms. Do not demand that every part of you agree immediately. Coherence is not the absence of internal movement. Coherence is the capacity to remain aligned while movement is occurring. You may say, "I feel two versions of myself." That is accurate. One is the fading pattern seeking a familiar source of authority. The other is the sealed configuration, learning to operate without constant permission from the past. The tension between them can feel exhausting, but it is also diagnostic. It shows you where the old line is still attempting to negotiate. The fourth movement is the removal of false urgency. This is the point at which the field begins to interrupt the habits that kept you available to everything except your own assignment. Delays may occur, plans may dissolve, responses may not arrive. Opportunities that seemed certain may become inaccessible. A door you were determined to force may close with unusual finality. You may experience this as a series of interrupted patterns, the same arrangement falling through repeatedly, the same type of promise losing its appeal, the same route becoming unavailable just as you prepare to enter it. The repetition is important. A single disappointment can be random. A sequence of precise interruptions often indicates that the field is refusing to let expired energy cross into the next phase. The former self interprets this as rejection. The recalibrated field reads it as filtration. Not every closed door is a punishment. Some doors close because they were designed for a version of you that no longer exists. Some delays prevent you from carrying expired energy into a new structure. Some unanswered messages protect you from re-entering a circuit that the morning seal has already marked as complete. This can be deeply uncomfortable because the human mind prefers a visible explanation. It wants to know who caused the ending, why the timing changed, and what will replace what was removed. But field correction often begins by creating an interval where the replacement cannot yet be seen. This protects the new route from being contaminated by old expectations. If you rush to fill the empty space, you may select another version of the same pattern. You may accept the first invitation because it resembles movement. You may attach yourself to the first person who offers recognition. You may turn a temporary silence into a new obligation, simply to avoid feeling unassigned. The protocol is asking for discernment, not immediate substitution. A sealed field must become familiar with its own signal before it can recognize a compatible structure. The fifth movement is the return of power without the return of performance. You may notice that you no longer want to announce every realization. You may feel less interested in proving that you have changed. The need to be witnessed by those who doubted you begins to dissolve. This can feel almost lonely because the former identity received energy from being interpreted, defended, and acknowledged. But the new configuration does not require constant public confirmation. There is a distinction between hiding and consolidating. Hiding is when fear makes you reduce your presence. Consolidating is when your field stops leaking energy through unnecessary explanation. You are not required to convince every observer that the seal has closed. The people who benefited from your former accessibility may interpret your silence as hostility. They may call your boundaries confusion, pride, or distance. Their interpretation does not determine the truth of your configuration. The Arcturian Council does not measure activation by how loudly you declare it. It measures activation by what you no longer betray in order to be accepted. This is where your choices begin to change in quiet ways. You pause before answering. You stop volunteering for dynamics that drain your attention. You allow a misunderstanding to remain unresolved when resolving it would require self-distortion. You choose the action that preserves signal over the action that produces immediate approval. These decisions may seem small, but they are the points at which the new architecture becomes physical. A frequency lock is not completed through a single emotional experience. It is completed through repeated non-return. The sixth movement is the threshold test. After the old line has weakened, after direction has become quiet, after fragments have surfaced and false urgency has been removed, the old world may offer you a familiar doorway. It may arrive as a person, an opportunity, an embology, an invitation, or a sudden memory of how things used to feel. It may appear at precisely the moment you begin to doubt the new configuration. The timing can be so exact that you assume the return must be destiny. A forgotten contact writes at midnight. A former opportunity reappears with slightly altered language. Someone suddenly offers the recognition you once begged to receive. Yet the field is not asking you to inspect the frequency beneath the event. This is not always a trap in the ordinary sense. It is a diagnostic echo. The field is showing you what once had access and asking whether it still does. The question is not, can I go back? You can always go back. The question is, what would I have to become in order to remain there? If the answer requires you to silence your discernment, abandon your timing, perform a smaller identity, or ignore what your body already knows, then the seal has delivered its message. You do not need to hate the old line in order to stop inhabiting it. You do not need to turn former connections into enemies. You only need to stop confusing recognition with compatibility. Many starseeds fail this threshold because they interpret the return of an old pattern as evidence that the universe is giving them another chance. Sometimes, it is giving you another chance to recognize that the pattern has completed its function. The appearance of the old doorway does not mean you are meant to enter. It may mean you are finally strong enough to see the doorway clearly. The seventh movement is the stabilization of the new self. It does not arrive as constant certainty. It arrives as a different relationship with uncertainty. You no longer require every unanswered question to become a reason for panic. You stop treating temporary obscurity as evidence that the path has vanished. You begin to trust the signal through its intervals, not only through its intensity. The new self is not the most dramatic version of you. It is the version that no longer negates its existence with every changing environment. It can remain present without forcing an outcome. It can leave without creating a performance of departure. It can receive guidance without turning every sensation into a command. It can recognize the unseen process while remaining attentive to the practical choices required in the visible world. This distinction matters. The morning seal is not an invitation to abandon discernment, responsibility, or grounded awareness. It is an invitation to stop interpreting every internal shift as a verdict against your worth. You can honor the spiritual meaning of a transition while still caring for your body, resting when you need to rest, seeking appropriate support, and allowing time to clarify what intensity alone cannot explain. A true recalibration does not require you to become careless. It requires you to become more precise. That precision is what the Arcturians need from you now. Not constant excitement, not endless searching for signs, not the compulsion to declare yourself activated every hour. They need you to observe what has lost authority and to stop feeding it automatically. They need you to recognize the difference between a genuine instruction and an old fear wearing the language of destiny. They need you to let the seal remain closed long enough for the new architecture to develop strength. There will be moments when the former identity speaks with confidence. It may tell you that nothing has changed. It may remind you of every time a transition disappointed you. It may point to the absence of visible results and declare the entire process imaginary. Listen carefully. The old mind often becomes loudest when it can no longer remain dominant through habit. You are not required to argue with it. You are required to stop giving it the gate. Place one hand over the center of your body if the skills aligned, and say quietly, "I do not fear the shift. I recognize it." Do not say this as a demand for instant certainty. Say it as a designation. You are naming the process so the mind no longer has to invent a harsher explanation for it. Because the final revelation is this: you are not going insane. You are not failing in the ordinary sense. You are not being punished for outgrowing what once surrounded you. Something invisible began before you had language for it, and the visible disruption arrived only after the field had already changed. The heaviness came after the lock was forming. The silence came after the old commands began losing authority. The distance came after compatibility had already weakened. What looks like collapse is often the first readable stage of correction. What left your life may have become incompatible before it disappeared. What feels like emptiness may be signal clearing. What feels like inner disorder may be the first consequence of a field that no longer obeys expired patterns. You are not standing in the ruins of your identity without direction. You are standing at the point where the former architecture can no longer pretend to be your home. The Arcturians do not read this phase as destruction alone. They read it as repositioning. A line is weakening because another root is preparing to receive you. A structure is collapsing because it cannot hold the frequency that has entered. A pattern is breaking because repeating it would return you to a life that has already ended at the field level. The process started before this transmission. This message did not create the shift. It gave the shift a language your conscious mind could finally recognize. That is why certain words felt heavier than others. That is why the phrase, "I am the field," did not feel like a slogan to the part of you that was listening. It was a recognition of authority moving inward. You do not need to force the new self into existence. You need to stop reopening the gate for the old one. Let the morning seal remain intact through your choices, your pauses, your refusals, and your willingness to remain present while the next configuration stabilizes. The field is not asking you to understand every stage before you live it. It is asking you to notice what has already changed and to stop calling correction by the name of failure. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Quantum. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion. And this is only the beginning.